Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands as she finished checking the aircraft engine for the third time that morning. The small regional airport was quiet, with only a few private planes scattered across the tarmac. She had been working as a civilian aircraft mechanic for nearly 10 years now, and most people saw her as just another skilled technician who kept the local flying club's planes in perfect condition. What they didn't know was that Sarah had once been one of the most promising fighter pilots the Air Force had ever seen. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hangar as Sarah gathered her tools. Her movements were precise and efficient, a habit that had never left her from her military days. She could disassemble and rebuild an engine faster than most mechanics with twice her experience, but she kept that skill hidden. It was better that way. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor asking if she could pick up some groceries on her way home. Sarah smiled and typed back a quick reply. This was her life now, simple, quiet, and completely ordinary. No one in the small town of Cedar Falls knew that she had once flown missions that required top-secret clearance, or that she had been hand-picked for an elite program that only existed in classified documents. As she locked up the hangar, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass door. At 35, she still maintained the physical fitness that had been drilled into her during her Air Force years, though she was careful not to make it obvious. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same coveralls as any other mechanic. Nothing about her appearance suggested she had once been capable of pulling 9Gs in an F-16 while engaging enemy targets. The drive home took her through the center of town, past the diner where she ate lunch most days, past the library where she volunteered on weekends, and past the small house she rented on Maple Street. Everything about her current life was deliberately unremarkable. She had worked hard to build this quiet existence, and for 10 years it had served her well. But as she pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and something about it made her instincts sharpen. She had learned long ago to trust those instincts, and right now, they were telling her that her carefully constructed, peaceful life might be about to change. Inside her house, Sarah went through her usual evening routine. She made dinner, watched the news, and read a book before bed. But part of her mind remained alert, listening for any unusual sounds outside. The sedan was still there when she checked through her bedroom curtains before turning off the lights. Sarah had left the military under circumstances that most people would never understand. It hadn't been her choice exactly, but it hadn't been forced either. She had made a decision that seemed right at the time, trading her wings for a promise of anonymity and a chance at a normal life. The Air Force had honored their part of the agreement, providing her with a new identity and enough money to start over somewhere quiet. For 10 years, she had convinced herself that she didn't miss flying. She told herself that working on engines was enough, that being close to aircraft was sufficient to satisfy whatever part of her still yearned for the sky. Most days, she almost believed it. The next morning, the sedan was gone, but Sarah's unease remained. She arrived at work earlier than usual and threw herself into a complicated repair job on a vintage Cessna. The plane's owner, an elderly man named Frank who had been flying for 50 years, watched her work with obvious admiration. "You've got hands like a surgeon," Frank said, not for the first time. "And you understand these machines like you were born to work on them. Ever think about getting your pilot's license? I'd be happy to teach you." Sarah smiled politely and gave him the same answer she always did. "I'm happy keeping my feet on the ground, Frank. Flying's not for me." If only he knew, she thought, that she had once been qualified to fly aircraft that Frank couldn't even imagine. The F-22 Raptor was a machine that represented the absolute pinnacle of aerial combat technology, and Sarah had been one of only a handful of people ever trained to fly it in actual combat situations. But that was before the incident that had changed everything. Before she had walked away from the only life she had ever wanted. As Frank continued chatting about flying while she worked, Sarah found her mind drifting back to those early days of her Air Force career. She had been 22 when she first climbed into the cockpit of a fighter jet, young and eager and absolutely certain that she was meant to be in the sky. The feeling of power and freedom that came with controlling such a sophisticated machine had been unlike anything else she had ever experienced. She had excelled quickly, moving through training programs that eliminated most other candidates. Her instructors had noted her exceptional spatial awareness, her ability to make split-second decisions under pressure, and her almost intuitive understanding of aircraft systems. Within 3 years, she had been flying combat missions, and within 5, she had been selected for a program so classified that even thinking about it now made her nervous. The sound of Frank's voice brought her back to the present. He was telling her about an air show he had attended the previous weekend, describing the aerobatic performances with enthusiasm. Sarah nodded and made appropriate comments, but her thoughts remained elsewhere. That evening, as she walked to her car, Sarah noticed another unfamiliar vehicle in the airport parking lot. This time it was a dark SUV with government plates. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to walk normally to her car and drive home at her usual speed. Whatever was happening, she had a feeling that her decade of secrets was about to come to an end. The question was whether she was ready for what might come next, and whether the skills she had spent 10 years trying to forget were about to become the most important things in her life once again. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah stared at the ceiling and wondered if she would ever truly be able to escape her past, or if some things were simply too important to stay buried forever. The knock on Sarah's door came at exactly 7 in the morning, 3 sharp raps that sounded official and unavoidable. She had been awake for an hour already, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, somehow knowing that this day would be different from all the others that had come before it. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a crisp business suit standing on her porch. The woman appeared to be in her 40s with short blonde hair and the kind of posture that suggested military background. Behind her, partially visible, was a man in a similar suit. Sarah recognized the type immediately. They were government and they were here about her past. "Ms. Martinez," the woman said when Sarah opened the door. "My name is Colonel Rebecca Hayes, United States Air Force. This is Agent Morrison from the Department of Defense. We need to speak with you about a matter of national security." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She scanned the street quickly, noting the black SUV she had seen the night before, now parked directly in front of her house. 2 more figures were visible inside the vehicle. This wasn't a casual visit. "I think you have the wrong person," Sarah said carefully. "I'm just a mechanic." Colonel Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We know exactly who you are, Captain Rodriguez. Or should I say former Captain Rodriguez? May we come in?" The use of her real name hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 10 years, she had been Sarah Martinez, quiet aircraft mechanic. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been buried so deep that sometimes she almost forgot that person had ever existed. Almost. Sarah stepped aside and let them enter. Her small living room suddenly felt crowded with these official visitors, their presence bringing with it memories and possibilities she had spent years trying to avoid. "Coffee?" she offered, mainly to buy herself time to think. "That would be appreciated," Colonel Hayes said, settling into Sarah's armchair as if she belonged there. Agent Morrison remained standing near the window, his attention split between the conversation and whatever he might see outside. In the kitchen, Sarah's hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of making coffee, but her mind was racing. Why now? What had changed after all these years of silence? The agreement she had made when she left the service was supposed to guarantee her anonymity as long as she kept quiet about what she knew. When she returned with the coffee, Colonel Hayes was studying a framed photograph on the side table, one of the few pictures Sarah had kept from her old life. It showed a group of pilots standing in front of an F-16, all of them young and confident and eager. Sarah was third from the left, barely recognizable under her helmet and flight gear. "You were very good," Colonel Hayes said, accepting the coffee. "Your file makes for impressive reading. Top of your class in flight school, exemplary combat record, selected for the most advanced fighter program in Air Force history. Your commanding officers called you a natural pilot." "That was a long time ago," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of her sofa. "I'm not that person anymore." Agent Morrison spoke for the first time. "With respect, Captain, people don't stop being what they were born to be. Skills like yours don't just disappear." Sarah felt a familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she used to get when she was cleared for takeoff. She pushed it down firmly. "I signed an agreement. I kept my part of it. I've been completely silent about everything I saw and did. I built a new life." "And you've done an excellent job," Colonel Hayes acknowledged. "Your cover has been perfect. Even we had trouble tracking you down initially, but circumstances have changed and we need your help." The words Sarah had been dreading finally came. She had known this moment might arrive someday, but she had hoped it never would. The quiet life she had built was about to be shattered, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "What kind of circumstances?" she asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Colonel Hayes set down her coffee cup and leaned forward. "Are you familiar with the current situation in the South China Sea?" Sarah nodded. Even living in small-town isolation, she kept up with world events. Tensions had been rising for months between the United States and China over territorial disputes and military presence in the region. 3 days ago, Chinese forces shot down one of our reconnaissance aircraft, Agent Morrison said. The pilot was captured along with sensitive intelligence about our operations in the area. The situation is escalating rapidly. "I'm sorry to hear that," Sarah said carefully, "but I don't see how this involves me. I've been out of the military for 10 years. Colonel Hayes pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of satellite images. They showed what appeared to be a heavily fortified island with sophisticated anti-aircraft systems and several military installations. "This is where they're holding our pilot," she explained. "The island is protected by the most advanced air defense network the Chinese have ever deployed. Getting in and out would require flying at extremely low altitude through a canyon system that leads to the island's only vulnerable approach vector." Sarah studied the images, her trained eye automatically calculating approach angles, threat zones, and potential flight paths. Before she could stop herself, she was thinking like a pilot again, seeing the tactical problem and beginning to work out solutions. "It would be difficult," she admitted, then caught herself. "But I'm sure you have plenty of qualified pilots who could handle it." "Actually, we don't," Colonel Hayes said quietly. "The approach requires flying an F-22 through a canyon that's barely wider than the aircraft's wingspan. The pilot would need to maintain speeds of over 500 miles per hour, while following a flight path accurate to within inches. There are maybe 5 people in the world with the skill and experience to attempt such a mission." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She knew where this was going. "Of those 5 people," Agent Morrison continued, 2 are currently deployed overseas. 1 is recovering from injuries sustained in a training accident, and 1 has been diagnosed with a medical condition that prevents him from flying. "That leaves 1, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That leaves you," Colonel Hayes confirmed. "You're the only pilot we have with both the technical skill and the specific experience with the F-22 systems that would make this mission possible." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where she had lived peacefully for so many years. Children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk, and old Mrs. Chen was watering her garden. It was the kind of normal, everyday scene that she had cherished precisely because it was so different from her former life. "The F-22 program was classified beyond top secret," she said finally. "Officially, I was never part of it. Officially, it never existed." "Officially, a lot of things never existed," Colonel Hayes replied. "But right now, we need someone who can fly that aircraft, like it's an extension of their own body. Someone who understands its capabilities so completely that they can push it beyond what the manual says is possible." Sarah turned back to face them. "And if I refuse? Then a good man dies in Chinese custody, and we lose intelligence that could compromise the safety of thousands of American military personnel," Agent Morrison said bluntly. "But we can't force you. You completed your service honorably, and you've earned the right to your quiet life." The room fell silent. Sarah could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sound of traffic on the main road, the normal sounds of the peaceful life she had built. But underneath it all, she could almost hear the whisper of jet engines and feel the pull of the sky that had never really left her. 10 years ago, she had walked away from flying because she thought she had to choose between her duty and her conscience. Now it seemed duty was calling her back. Sarah's answer came not in words, but in the way she unconsciously straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, a posture Colonel Hayes recognized immediately as that of a pilot accepting a mission. Even after 10 years away from the cockpit, some things were hardwired too deeply to disappear. "I'll need to see current intelligence on the target area," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone of professional authority that hadn't been heard in her small town for a decade. Weather patterns, updated defensive positions, and detailed topographical maps of the canyon system. Colonel Hayes nodded and made a quick phone call. Within minutes, Agent Morrison was setting up a secure laptop on Sarah's kitchen table, transforming her quiet home into an impromptu mission briefing room. The intelligence files painted a sobering picture. The island fortress was even more heavily defended than the initial images had suggested. Surface-to-air missile batteries covered every conventional approach route, and Chinese fighter patrols maintained constant coverage of the surrounding airspace. The only viable path in was through a narrow canyon system that cut into the island from the north. And even that route was barely possible. The canyon is exactly 48 feet wide at its narrowest point, Agent Morrison explained, pulling up a three-dimensional model on the laptop screen. The F-22 has a wingspan of 44 feet and 4 inches. That gives you less than 2 feet of clearance on each side. Sarah leaned over the screen, studying the canyon's twists and turns. Her mind automatically began calculating the flight path, accounting for air currents, potential wind shear, and the precise timing required to navigate each turn without losing speed or control. "What about the exit strategy?" she asked. "That's where it gets complicated," Colonel Hayes admitted. "The rescue has to happen during a very specific window. Our intelligence indicates that the prisoner will be moved to a different facility within 72 hours. Once he's moved, we'll lose our chance to get him back." Sarah nodded, still focused on the tactical display. "And the aircraft? I assume the F-22 isn't exactly sitting at the local airport." "Actually," Colonel Hayes said with something that might have been a smile, "it's closer than you might think. There's a classified airbase about 2 hours from here. The aircraft is already being prepared." The next several hours passed in a blur of technical briefings, equipment checks, and medical evaluations. Sarah found herself slipping back into the mindset she had worked so hard to leave behind. The focused, analytical state of mind that allowed a pilot to process vast amounts of information while maintaining the split-second reflexes necessary for high-speed flight. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the flight surgeon who examined her, seemed surprised by Sarah's physical condition. "For someone who's been out of active flight status for 10 years, you're in remarkable shape," she observed while reviewing Sarah's test results. "Your reaction times are still well within pilot standards, and your G-force tolerance appears to be unchanged." Sarah didn't mention the daily workouts she had maintained religiously, or the flight simulator software she had installed on her home computer years ago, but claimed never to use. Some habits were harder to break than others. As evening approached, Sarah found herself sitting in the passenger seat of an unmarked SUV, watching familiar countryside roll past the windows as they drove toward the classified airbase. Colonel Hayes sat beside her, occasionally fielding phone calls that consisted mostly of monosyllabic responses and military jargon. "Having second thoughts?" the colonel asked during a quiet moment. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Every pilot has second thoughts before a dangerous mission. It's the ones who don't that you should worry about." The airbase, when they finally reached it, looked like nothing more than a collection of maintenance buildings and a single runway surrounded by farmland. But Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle signs that revealed its true nature. The unusually long runway, the hardened aircraft shelters built into what looked like innocent hills, and the sophisticated radar arrays disguised as agricultural equipment. Inside the main hangar, Sarah got her first look at the F-22 Raptor that would be her aircraft for the mission. Even after 10 years, the sight of the sleek fighter took her breath away. The aircraft represented the absolute pinnacle of American aerospace engineering, and seeing it again brought back memories of the first time she had been cleared to fly one. "She's been modified for this specific mission," explained Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the maintenance chief. "Extended-range fuel tanks, updated navigation systems, and some defensive modifications I'm not authorized to discuss. But she's never been in better condition." Sarah walked slowly around the aircraft, her hands automatically checking access panels, control surfaces, and weapon systems. The F-22 was a machine that demanded respect, even when it was sitting motionless in a hangar. In flight, it was capable of speeds over Mach 2 and could pull maneuvers that would render most pilots unconscious. "When do we launch?" she asked. "Tomorrow night," Colonel Hayes replied. "The weather window opens at 2100 hours and closes at 2300. That gives you exactly 2 hours to complete the entire mission. Ingress, rescue, and egress." Sarah nodded, still studying the aircraft. Tomorrow night, she would be flying again for the first time in 10 years. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced since she left the military, a sense of purpose that went beyond her own personal desires. That night, In the Spartan quarters provided for her on the base, Sarah lay awake thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 10 years ago, she had been involved in a classified incident that had shaken her faith in the military mission. A decision made by higher-ups had resulted in civilian casualties, and Sarah had found herself caught between her loyalty to the service and her personal sense of right and wrong. She had chosen to speak up, to file a report that detailed what had really happened during that mission. The response had been swift and decisive. Officially, she was granted an honorable discharge for medical reasons. Unofficially, she was offered a choice: disappear quietly and never speak of what she knew, or face the possibility of prosecution under national security laws. Sarah had chosen disappearance, trading her wings for anonymity and the promise of a peaceful life. For 10 years, she had convinced herself it was the right choice. But now, lying in a military bunk and preparing for a mission that only she could fly, Sarah realized that running away from difficult choices hadn't made her a better person. It had just made her a person who was hiding from who she really was. Tomorrow night, she would be Captain Elena Rodriguez again, flying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world on a mission that could change the course of international relations. The quiet life of Sarah Martinez, small-town mechanic, was about to end. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself wondering if she was ready to be a pilot again, or if the last 10 years had changed her too much to ever really return to the sky. Dawn came too early and not early enough. Sarah had been awake since 4 in the morning, running through the mission profile in her mind for what felt like the 100th time. Every turn in the canyon, every timing mark, every potential threat had been memorized until the entire flight path existed, like a 3-dimensional map in her consciousness. The day passed in a careful routine of preparation. Physical training to ensure her body was ready for the intense G-forces she would face. Technical briefings with the ground crew who would support the mission. Weather updates that showed a narrow window of favorable conditions that evening. And through it all, the growing awareness that in a few hours, she would be flying again. "Your flight suit," said Technical Sergeant Davis, handing Sarah the familiar combination of fabric and technology that would keep her alive at 50,000 feet. The suit felt strange after so many years of coveralls and civilian clothes, but as Sarah put it on, muscle memory took over. Her hands found zippers and connections automatically, and within minutes, she looked like a pilot again. Colonel Hayes found her in the equipment room, checking her helmet and reviewing the mission communications protocols one final time. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Sarah looked up from the technical manual she had been studying. "Like someone who hasn't flown in 10 years and is about to attempt one of the most dangerous missions in Air Force history." "That's honest," the colonel replied. "But our flight psychologist says that's actually a good sign. Overconfidence kills pilots. Healthy respect for the danger keeps them alive." At 1800 hours, Sarah joined the final mission briefing in the base's secure conference room. Satellite imagery showed the target island in real time, with Chinese patrol boats visible around its perimeter, and fighter aircraft making regular sweeps of the surrounding airspace. The captured American pilot was being held in a compound on the eastern side of the island, accessible only through the canyon approach that would be Sarah's route in. "The rescue team will be in position by 20-30 hours, explained Major Peterson, the mission commander. "They'll begin their infiltration as soon as you create the diversion on the western side of the island. You'll have exactly 15 minutes to draw the defender's attention while the team extracts the prisoner." Sarah nodded, understanding her role in the larger operation. She would be flying alone into heavily defended airspace, relying on the F-22's stealth capabilities and her own skill to avoid detection until the last possible moment. Then she would deliberately reveal herself, drawing the Chinese forces away from the real rescue operation. "What about my own extraction?" she asked. The room fell silent for a moment. Major Peterson looked uncomfortable. "You'll need to use the same canyon route for egress. The timing will be tight, but it's the only way out that doesn't involve flying through the main defensive network." Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. If anything went wrong with the timing, if the Chinese forces repositioned their defenses, if her aircraft was damaged during the diversion, she would be trapped on the island with no way out. "Understood," she said simply. At 2000 hours, Sarah walked out to the flight line where the F-22 waited. The aircraft had been loaded with fuel and the minimal equipment necessary for the mission. No weapons beyond what was required for self-defense. This was a rescue operation, not an attack mission. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez conducted the final walk-around inspection with her, checking every system and connection. "She's ready to fly," he said finally. "Engines are running perfectly, all systems are green, and the stealth coating is in perfect condition. You'll be invisible until you want to be seen." Sarah climbed into the cockpit, her hands automatically finding the familiar controls. For a moment, sitting in the pilot's seat of an F-22 again, she felt like no time had passed at all. The instruments glowed with the same soft light. The control stick felt the same in her hand, and the distinctive smell of the aircraft's systems brought back memories of every flight she had ever taken. But as she began the startup sequence, Sarah realized that 10 years had changed her more than she had expected. The pilot who had left the Air Force had been young and confident, certain that skill and determination could overcome any obstacle. The woman who was returning to the cockpit now understood that some choices came with consequences that lasted forever. "Tower, this is Ghost 1 requesting permission for takeoff," she said into her radio, using the mission call sign that had been assigned to her. "Ghost 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds are light and variable. Visibility unlimited. Good hunting." Sarah pushed the throttles forward, and the F-22's engines responded with a roar that seemed to shake the entire world. The aircraft rolled forward, gathering speed with the smooth acceleration that only a fighter jet could provide. At 150 miles per hour, Sarah pulled back on the stick, and the F-22 lifted off into the evening sky. Flying again after 10 years was like remembering how to breathe. The controls responded to her touch as if she had never been away, and the aircraft seemed to read her intentions before she fully formed them. Within minutes, Sarah was cruising at 40,000 feet. The F-22's stealth technology making her invisible to any radar system that might be searching for her. The flight to the target area took 90 minutes, crossing international waters under the cover of darkness. Sarah used the time to run through the mission profile one more time, checking her navigation systems and reviewing the intelligence reports on enemy defensive positions. As she approached the South China Sea, Sarah began to see lights on the horizon, ships and aircraft moving through the disputed waters. The Chinese military presence was heavier than she had expected, with patrol boats and aircraft maintaining a constant watch over the approaches to their island fortress. "Ghost 1, this is Control," came a voice over her radio. "You are approaching the target area. Confirm your status. Control, Ghost 1. All systems nominal. Beginning descent to approach altitude." Sarah pushed the stick forward, and the F-22 began a controlled dive toward the ocean surface. The plan called for her to approach the island at an altitude of less than 100 feet, using the curvature of the Earth to stay below the horizon of the Chinese radar systems until the last possible moment. At 500 feet above the dark water, Sarah leveled off and increased her speed. The F-22 responded instantly, accelerating past the speed of sound with barely a whisper. At this altitude and speed, she was committed to the mission. There would be no turning back now. Ahead in the darkness, Sarah could see the faint outline of the target island rising from the sea. Somewhere on that island, an American pilot was waiting for rescue, and somewhere else, a team of special operations soldiers was preparing to risk their lives to bring him home. In 15 minutes, Sarah would begin the most dangerous part of her mission, the flight through the canyon that only she had the skill to survive. And after that, if everything went according to plan, she would have to do it again in reverse while Chinese fighters searched the sky for her. For the first time in 10 years, Captain Elena Rodriguez was going to war. The canyon entrance appeared in Sarah's heads-up display like a dark wound in the side of the island. At 600 miles per hour and only 50 feet above the water, she had perhaps 3 seconds to make the turn that would take her into the narrow passage between towering rock walls. Sarah pulled the stick hard right, and the F-22 responded instantly, banking into a turn so sharp that she felt the G-forces pushing her deep into her seat. The canyon walls flashed past her wingtips with less than 18 inches to spare on each side. At this speed, even the smallest error would mean death. The first turn came up faster than she had expected. Sarah rolled the aircraft left, following the canyon's path as it twisted deeper into the island's interior. The rock walls were so close she could see individual scratches and weathering patterns carved by centuries of wind and rain. Her airspeed was now pushing 650 miles per hour, and the canyon was getting narrower. "Control, Ghost 1, she said into her radio, her voice steady, despite the incredible concentration required to fly through the passage. Beginning canyon run. ETA to target area 60 seconds. Copy Ghost 1. Rescue team reports they are in position. The canyon made a sharp S-curve that required Sarah to roll the F-22 nearly inverted to follow the path. For a moment she was flying upside down between walls of rock, trusting completely in her instruments and her memory of the mission profile. The aircraft's fly-by-wire control system helped, making tiny adjustments faster than human reflexes could manage, but ultimately, this was about pure piloting skill. 30 seconds into the canyon run, Sarah's radar warning receiver began chirping softly. Chinese radar systems on the island were starting to detect her, but the canyon walls were still providing enough interference to keep her location unclear. She needed to stay hidden for just a little longer. The canyon opened into a wider section, giving Sarah room to breathe for a few precious seconds. Ahead she could see the end of the passage and the island's interior beyond. According to her mission plan, this was where she would break cover and begin the diversion that would draw Chinese forces away from the rescue operation. Ghost 1. Control. Rescue team is beginning their approach. Commence diversion in 10 seconds. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed the throttles to full military power. The F-22's engines responded with a surge of thrust that pressed her back in her seat. She pulled the stick back sharply, and the aircraft climbed out of the canyon like a bullet fired from a gun. At 5,000 feet, Sarah lit her afterburners and turned toward the western side of the island. The F-22 accelerated past Mach 1, creating a sonic boom that echoed across the entire island. Every radar screen for 50 miles suddenly showed a target moving at impossible speed. The Chinese response was immediate and overwhelming. Surface-to-air missiles began launching from hidden positions, their exhaust trails creating deadly lines of fire across the night sky. Fighter aircraft that had been patrolling the outer perimeter began turning toward Sarah's position, their radar systems frantically trying to lock onto the elusive stealth fighter. Sarah rolled the F-22 into a series of high G turns, using the aircraft's superior maneuverability to avoid the missiles while staying in the target area long enough to maintain the diversion. Each evasive maneuver pulled her deeper into the island's defensive network, but it also kept the Chinese forces focused on her instead of searching for the rescue team. Control, Ghost 1. Diversion is effective. Multiple SAM launches, 4 fighters converging on my position. Copy Ghost 1. Rescue team reports they have located the package. Extraction in progress. Sarah rolled inverted and pulled the stick back, sending the F-22 into a steep dive toward the ocean. A missile streaked past her canopy, close enough that she could feel the heat from its exhaust. She leveled off at 200 feet and turned back toward the canyon, knowing that her escape route was about to become a deadly gauntlet. The Chinese fighters were closing fast, their more conventional aircraft unable to match the F-22's stealth, but compensating with superior numbers and knowledge of the local area. Sarah could see their navigation lights converging on her position from 3 different directions. Ghost 1, Control. Package is secure. Rescue team is en route to extraction point. You are cleared to begin egress. Sarah turned the F-22 toward the canyon entrance, but now she was approaching from the opposite direction, flying a route she had only studied on paper. The canyon that had been difficult to navigate in one direction was going to be nearly impossible in reverse, especially with Chinese fighters in pursuit. The first fighter to get within weapons range fired a missile that Sarah barely managed to avoid by rolling the F-22 into a knife-edge turn that brought her dangerously close to the canyon wall. The missile impacted the rock face in a shower of sparks and debris, but Sarah was already deep in the passage, racing toward the ocean at maximum speed. Flying through the canyon in reverse was like solving a 3-dimensional puzzle while balancing on a tightrope. Every turn that had been manageable on the ingress flight now came up unexpectedly, requiring split-second reactions and perfect timing. Sarah's hands moved constantly on the controls, making dozens of tiny adjustments every second to keep the aircraft centered in the narrow passage. The Chinese fighters couldn't follow her into the canyon, but they didn't need to. They positioned themselves at the ocean end of the passage, waiting for her to emerge into their trap. Sarah could see their radar signatures on her display, 4 aircraft in a defensive formation that would be impossible to avoid. Control, Ghost 1. Heavy resistance at canyon exit. Request immediate support. Ghost 1, Control. No support available. You're on your own. Sarah reached the final turn in the canyon, the one that would bring her out over the ocean and into the waiting Chinese fighters. She had one advantage. They wouldn't be expecting her to exit at 700 miles per hour. But that speed would also make it almost impossible for her to maneuver once she was clear of the canyon walls. She made her choice. Instead of slowing down for the turn, Sarah increased her speed even more, pushing the F-22 to its absolute limits. The aircraft shuddered as it approached Mach 1 in the confined space of the canyon. But it held together. Sarah burst out of the canyon like a meteor, moving so fast that the Chinese fighters' targeting systems couldn't track her quick enough to achieve a weapons lock. She rolled the F-22 hard left and dove toward the ocean surface, using the darkness and her speed to disappear before the enemy pilots could react. At 25 feet above the water, Sarah leveled off and began the long flight home. Behind her, the island was still lit up with searchlights and the exhaust trails of defensive missiles. But she was clear and moving away at nearly 800 miles per hour. Control. Ghost 1. Package delivered, mission complete. En route to home plate, copy Ghost 1, outstanding work. The package sends his thanks. Sarah smiled for the first time since the mission began. Somewhere behind her, an American pilot was free, and a rescue team was safely en route to their extraction point. The mission had succeeded, and she had proven to herself that 10 years away from flying hadn't diminished her skills when they were truly needed. As the lights of the Chinese island faded behind her, Sarah realized that she was no longer the person who had landed at the secret airbase the night before. The quiet life of Sarah Martinez was over, and Captain Elena Rodriguez had returned to the sky where she belonged. The landing at the secret airbase came 2 hours later, with Sarah's fuel gauges showing dangerously low levels and her hands trembling slightly from the sustained adrenaline of the mission. The F-22 touched down smoothly on the darkened runway, and Sarah felt a profound sense of relief that she had made it home. As she taxied toward the hangar, Sarah could see a crowd of people waiting for her. Ground crew, mission controllers, and medical personnel. The base's floodlights illuminated their faces, and she could see expressions of relief and admiration as she brought the aircraft to a stop. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was the first person to reach her as she climbed out of the cockpit. "Welcome home, Captain," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "That was some of the finest flying any of us have ever seen." Colonel Hayes appeared at Sarah's shoulder as she removed her helmet. "The rescued pilot is already on his way to a medical facility in Germany," she said. "The intelligence he was carrying has been secured, and the Chinese government is claiming the entire incident never happened." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. In the world of classified operations, success was often measured by how completely an event could be made to disappear from public knowledge. The mission would exist only in sealed files and the memories of the people who had participated in it. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the debriefing room. "That depends on you," Colonel Hayes replied. "Your performance tonight proves that you're still one of the finest pilots the Air Force has ever produced. We could use someone with your skills." The debriefing took 4 hours, with Sarah recounting every detail of the mission for analysts who would study her performance and learn from it. She described the canyon navigation, the evasive maneuvers against the Chinese fighters, and the split-second timing that had made the rescue possible. "Your approach speed through the canyon was faster than we thought possible," noted Dr. Martinez, the mission analyst. "Computer simulations suggested that anything over 500 miles per hour would be unmanageable, but you were maintaining 650 to 700 mph through most of the passage." Sarah shrugged. "The aircraft was capable of it. I just had to trust the technology and my training." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it had been more than that. Flying through the canyon had required a level of intuitive connection with the aircraft that went beyond training or technology. It was the kind of flying that could only come from someone who truly belonged in the cockpit. As dawn broke over the airbase, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the pilot's lounge, still wearing her flight suit and staring out at the F-22 that had carried her through the most dangerous mission of her career. The aircraft sat silent and motionless in the hangar, but to Sarah, it still seemed alive with potential energy. Colonel Hayes found her there an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like someone who had been awake all night managing a crisis. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair next to Sarah. "I spent 10 years convincing myself that I didn't miss this," Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. 10 years telling myself that working on engines was enough, that I could be happy with my feet on the ground. And now, Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching maintenance crews service the F-22. Now I realize I was lying to myself. I never stopped being a pilot. I just stopped flying. Colonel Hayes nodded. We've prepared an offer for you. Full reinstatement at your previous rank, assignment to a classified test program that would use your F-22 experience, and a chance to help develop the next generation of fighter aircraft. Sarah turned to look at her. And if I choose to go back to my quiet life in Cedar Falls? Then you go back, Colonel Hayes said simply. Your service record will be updated to reflect last night's mission, but your civilian identity will remain protected. The choice is entirely yours. For Sarah, the choice had actually been made somewhere over the South China Sea. In the moment when she realized that flying the F-22 through an impossible canyon felt more natural than 10 years of working in a garage. But she still needed time to think about what accepting the offer would mean. Can I have some time to decide? Take all the time you need, Colonel Hayes replied. But I should mention that the test program I mentioned is developing something that might interest you. We're working on an aircraft that would make the F-22 look like a training plane. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What kind of aircraft? The kind that requires pilots willing to push the boundaries of what's possible, Colonel Hayes said with a smile. The kind that needs someone who can fly through a canyon at 700 miles per hour and make it look easy. Later that morning, Sarah found herself back in the unmarked SUV, being driven toward the small town where she had lived peacefully for 10 years. But as the countryside rolled past the windows, she realized that peace was no longer what she wanted. The mission had awakened something in her that had been dormant but never truly dead. The feeling of controlling an aircraft at the very edge of its capabilities, the satisfaction of completing a mission that no one else could attempt, the knowledge that her skills could make the difference between life and death for people she would never meet. These were things that no quiet civilian life could replace. When they reached Cedar Falls, Sarah asked to be dropped off at the airport where she had worked as a mechanic. She wanted to see Frank and tell him that she would be leaving town soon. She owed him that much, even if she couldn't tell him the real reason why. Frank was working on his vintage Cessna when Sarah found him, and he looked up with his usual friendly smile. Sarah, I was beginning to wonder where you'd disappeared to. Haven't seen you for a couple of days. I've been thinking about what you said, Sarah replied. About getting my pilot's license. Frank's face lit up. Really, that's wonderful. I always thought you had a natural feel for aircraft. When would you like to start lessons? Sarah smiled, thinking about the F-22 sitting in a classified hangar 2 hours away. Actually, Frank, I think I'm ready for something a little more advanced than lessons. That afternoon, Sarah called Colonel Hayes and accepted the offer to return to active duty. The quiet life of Sarah Martinez, small-town mechanic, was officially over. Captain Elena Rodriguez was coming home to the sky where she had always belonged. But this time she was returning with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a pilot. 10 years of hiding had taught her that true purpose couldn't be buried forever, and that some people were simply born to fly. 6 months later, Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the flight line at Edwards Air Force Base, looking up at an aircraft that defied every conventional understanding of what a fighter jet should look like. The X-47B prototype was more like a flying wing than a traditional aircraft, its sleek lines and angular surfaces designed to be completely invisible to radar while carrying weapons that existed only in the imagination of aerospace engineers. She doesn't look like much, said Major Tom Bradley, the test program director, as he joined Sarah on the tarmac. But the computer simulation suggests she can do things that shouldn't be physically possible. Sarah walked around the aircraft slowly, her trained eye taking in every detail of its revolutionary design. After 6 months of intensive training and security clearances that went deeper than anything she had experienced before, she was finally seeing the project that had brought her back to active duty. What's her top speed? She asked. Classified, Major Bradley replied with a grin. But let's just say that if you think the F-22 was fast, this thing will redefine your understanding of velocity. The X-47B represented the next evolution in American air superiority, incorporating stealth technology that made the F-22 look crude by comparison, and propulsion systems that had been developed in complete secrecy over the past decade. Only a handful of people in the world knew the aircraft existed, and even fewer were qualified to fly it. Sarah had spent the past 6 months relearning everything she thought she knew about flying. The X-47B's control systems were so advanced that they bordered on artificial intelligence, capable of making thousands of adjustments per second while maintaining flight paths that human reflexes couldn't manage alone. Flying it would require a partnership between pilot and machine that was unlike anything in aviation history. "Your first flight is scheduled for next week," Major Bradley said as they walked back toward the hangar. "Are you ready?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. The canyon run in the F-22 had seemed impossible until she actually did it. The X-47B represented a challenge that was several orders of magnitude more complex, but she had learned something important about herself during that mission over the South China Sea. When the stakes were high enough, she was capable of things that surprised even her. "I'm ready," she said. That evening, Sarah called her old neighbor from Cedar Falls, Mrs. Chen, who had been watering her plants while she was away. The elderly woman had never asked too many questions about Sarah's sudden departure, accepting the explanation that she had been offered a better job in another state. "How is your new work?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Are you happy?" Sarah looked out her quarters window at the X-47B sitting in its hangar, surrounded by technicians making final preparations for the test program. "Yes," she said. "I think I'm finally doing what I was meant to do." After she hung up the phone, Sarah opened her laptop and began reviewing the flight manual for the X-47B one more time. The aircraft's capabilities were so advanced that some of the planned test flights would push the boundaries of what the human body could endure. G-forces that would render most pilots unconscious, speeds that approached the theoretical limits of atmospheric flight, and maneuvers that had only been tested in computer simulations. But as she studied the technical specifications, Sarah felt the same excitement she had experienced as a young pilot, climbing into her first fighter jet. The X-47B represented the future of aerial combat, and she was going to be among the first people to explore that future. Her secure phone rang at midnight. Displaying Colonel Hayes' number. "Captain Rodriguez," she answered. "Sarah, we've just received intelligence that suggests the Chinese are further along with their own next-generation fighter program than we thought," Colonel Hayes said without preamble. "The timeline for the X-47B testing has been moved up. Your first flight is tomorrow." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Tomorrow? The pre-flight checklist alone takes 6 hours. The ground crew has been working around the clock to prepare the aircraft. We need to know what this machine can really do, and we need to know it now." After Colonel Hayes hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her quarters, thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. 10 years ago, she had walked away from flying because she thought the military was asking her to compromise her principles. Now she was back, preparing to test an aircraft that could determine the balance of power in the world for decades to come. But this time was different. This time she understood that being a pilot wasn't just about personal fulfillment or even serving her country. It was about pushing the boundaries of human capability, about exploring the edge of what was possible when technology and skill combined in perfect harmony. The next morning, Sarah suited up for her first flight in the X-47B, with the same ritual precision she had used before the Canyon mission: flight suit, helmet, and the knowledge that she was about to attempt something that had never been done before. As she walked out to the aircraft, Sarah could see the entire test team gathered to watch. Engineers, technicians, military officials, and other test pilots all stood in silence as she approached the X-47B. The weight of their expectations was almost tangible, but Sarah felt calm and focused. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had somehow been transferred to Edwards to work on the program, conducted the final walk-around inspection with her. "She's ready to fly," he said finally. "And so are you." Sarah climbed into the cockpit of the X-47B and immediately felt the difference from every other aircraft she had ever flown. The control systems responded to her touch with an almost supernatural sensitivity, and the heads-up display showed information in ways that seemed to anticipate her thoughts. "Tower, this is Ghost 7 requesting permission for takeoff," she said, using her new call sign for the test program. "Ghost 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Make history." Sarah pushed the throttles forward, and the X-47B's engines responded with a whisper of power that somehow seemed more impressive than the roar of conventional jet engines. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with smooth, relentless force, and at 180 miles per hour, Sarah pulled back on the stick. The X-47B lifted off into the California sky, and Sarah knew immediately that she was flying something extraordinary. The aircraft didn't just respond to her commands. It seemed to read her intentions and execute them with a precision that was almost telepathic. As she climbed through 20,000 feet, Sarah realized that her decade of secrets had led her to this moment. Every choice she had made, every sacrifice she had accepted, every skill she had developed had prepared her for this, to be the pilot who would explore the future of flight itself. Below her, the Edwards test range stretched out to the horizon, waiting for her to discover what the X-47B could really do. And for the first time in 10 years, Captain Elena Rodriguez felt like she was exactly where she belonged, at the controls of an impossible machine, pushing the boundaries of the sky.